Welcome to today's show. I'm so excited about our guest today, David McKnight. He's a movie star. He starred in the movie The Power of Zero. He's an author. We've shared the same stage together. He's trained thousands and hundreds of thousands of advisors around the world. So, David, welcome to the show. Tell us about your journey in the financial services industry.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tom. This is really the only thing I've ever done. Right out of college, right out of BYU, I got into the financial services industry. It was back in 1997, so I've been at it for over 25 years, and really became attuned to this idea that the fiscal trajectory of our nation over the next 75 years is unstable. It's we've promised way more than we can afford to deliver in the form of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and I just became attuned to this whole idea of where our country is headed financially right around 2010, and I started presenting to groups all across the country about the reality that tax rates, even by 2030, would have to rise dramatically or we could go broke as a country. And so the thing that dawned on me was that, hey, most Americans have the lion's share of their savings accumulated in 401ks and IRAs. What's going to happen to those people if tax rates were to, for example, double? How much of their hard-earned retirement savings are they going to be able to keep? So in 2013, I published a book called The Power of Zero. Okay, and The Power of Zero talks about the reality that tax rates down the road are likely to be higher than they are today, and what Americans can do to help shield themselves from those higher tax rates. And so I wrote the book, I threw it out on Amazon, I crossed my fingers, and people just started to buy it. And here we are, 10 years later or so, and it's sold over 400,000 copies. And so I go around the country speaking all about the fiscal condition of our country and how people can prepare themselves against the reality of higher tax rates down the road.
So let's talk about that for a minute. So you've got 7 kids. I got 4 kids. I've taught my kids some things about money. Share with us some things you teach your kids on how to prepare for what's coming.
Yeah, well, I've got a couple of entrepreneurs. I do have 7 kids. I've got a couple of entrepreneurs. I've got a 14-year-old that every Saturday he goes out and he cleans cars and he cleans golf carts and things like that. And he's like, Dad, I brought home $280 today. I said, well, let's pay some tithing first. Let's give 10% to our church. Let's save 20% right off the top, and then you can spend the rest however you like. So it's this question of paying yourself first and then spending whatever's left over at the end. If you wait until the end of the month and hope and pray that there is something left over, invariably there will not be anything left over. So I just try to instill in my children this idea that you tithe first, you spend, you save 20%, and then it's totally up to you how you want to allocate the rest. Yep. And that's been a principle that's really worked well.
And that is a great formula. Give 10%, save 20%, live on 70%. If people did that, they would, and if our government did things like that, we wouldn't be in the shape that we're in. So David, why did you write the book, The Power of Zero?
Well, so there's all these experts that are predicting that there will come a point in time beyond which we can no longer procrastinate raising taxes. But when you look at it, 95% of the cumulative retirement balances for Americans all across the country are situated in IRAs and 401ks. In other words, they're basically saying, look, I'd much rather take a deduction at today's historically low tax rates and then sort of roll the dice and kick the can down the road on paying taxes on those accounts. And to me, that seemed entirely at odds with strategy that would allow them to wring the most efficiency out of their retirement dollars. And so to me, it felt like I needed to raise a warning cry. Look, we're marching into the future where tax rates are likely to be much higher. Why are Americans still so addicted to that tax deduction today? Why are they contributing? Why is 95% of those retirement dollars situated within those tax-deferred accounts? How much of their hard-earned retirement savings are they really going to be able to keep? It seemed like writing a book was the ideal way to get that message out.
And if we go back to when IRAs and 401ks started, tax rates were higher, and it did make sense to take the deduction and then defer the taxes, let it grow, and then when you retired and you were in a lower tax bracket, it made perfect sense. And so we all did it. But now we know tax rates are going to have to go higher. It doesn't make sense to me to take money out to get the deduction so that you can defer your taxes and then pay them when it's higher. And so I think that's one of the reasons why this book is gaining traction. But what are some of the other reasons that you see it's gaining traction?
Well, I think that what I've somehow been able to do in the past year is reduce some fairly complex principles down to sort of simple terms. And I've basically reduced the entire investment world down to three basic types of accounts. I refer to them in buckets. And basically, you got three basic types of buckets. You got your taxable bucket. Those are your emergency fund type accounts. You've got your tax deferred accounts. Those are your 401ks, IRAs. I like to talk about those in terms of being in a business partnership with the IRS, and every year they get to vote on what percentage of your profits they get to keep. Not a very good business partnership. And then I talk about true tax-free investments like Roth IRAs, Roth 401ks, Roth conversions, some forms of properly funded life insurance. And so I basically articulated the three types of money. And then I say, look, in a rising tax rate environment, there's an ideal amount of money to have in each of those buckets. And anything above and beyond the ideal balances in your taxable and tax deferred buckets should be systematically repositioned to tax-free. You want to shift that money slowly enough that you don't rise into a tax bracket that gives you heartburn, but you want to do it quickly enough that you don't rise into, but do it quickly enough that you get all the heavy lifting done before tax rates go up for good. And so I think I've been able to distill that message down into very, very simple terms, and I think people have embraced it.
Yeah, and I know I personally converted almost all of my IRAs and 401ks to Roth, and I've been moving more of my personal wealth to cash value life insurance. So I'm trying to build for myself and my family more sources of tax-free income in retirement, and that's what you're doing. I know you've done a lot of work with David Walker, the former Comptroller General, and our country has huge fiscal problems. We're $33 trillion in debt that climbs at almost $5 billion every single morning. There's almost $200 trillion of unfunded obligations for Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, government pensions, military pensions. Talk about these fiscal challenges and what do you see happening?
Well, David Walker rightly points out that there's not, people aren't all that worried about it because there's no immediate crisis. There isn't an immediate crisis. It's not so much what's happening now, it's what's likely to happen over time. I mean, you look at the almost $34 trillion of debt that you talked about, and none of that has come from the big problems that we'll be facing in the future. None of it's come from Social Security, none of it's come from Medicare, none of it's come from Medicaid. It's come from wars, and it's come from the prescription drug program that cost $8 trillion that was an unfunded obligation. It's come from COVID and all these different types of things. So the real spending has only just begun. Okay, between now and 2033, there's going to be $2 trillion of additional debt per year. After 2033, that's going to go up to $3 trillion per year. So we are marching into a future where the cost of servicing the national debt will consume the entire federal budget under today's tax rate. So this is a crisis, and unless we start putting measures in place to permanently fix and make solvent Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, we're going to get to the point where 50% of our income, 50% of my income and 50% of your income is going to go to pay for taxes. And we're not going to get cool stuff like the Swedes get. We're not going to get universal health care. We're not going to get paid leave. We're going to just take that 50% and use it to service the national debt.
Yeah. And all debt is taking from our future, spending it today. So we've taken all this money from our future. It's already spent, and now we have to pay interest on that debt. Now, in your book, you say that the taxes could double. I think they could easily double. I think they could more than double. But share with me why that's going to happen.
Yeah, and people call me alarmist and inflammatory for saying that tax rates could double. But what people forget who haven't studied history is that tax rates historically have been a lot higher than they are today. I mean, if you look in the immediate wake of World War II, the highest marginal tax bracket was 94% on any dollar you made above and beyond $200,000. Now people say, deductions worked a little bit differently. You could deduct credit card debt and interest on your car payment, those types of things, but you were still paying an effective rate that was much higher than it is today. So people tend to forget that we have historically paid a lot more taxes than we're paying today. And once we acknowledge where tax rates have been, we can also acknowledge that tax rates have the ability to go higher in the future. Today, we're at historically low tax rates, but we can't afford to be at historically low tax rates. So tax rates are likely to rise. David Walker says by 2030, they could double, or we essentially would go broke as a nation.
Yeah. And I think if our government leaders would realize the problem is the debt's been going like this. If we could say we're going to pay it off over 200 years, and I think that would stabilize a lot of things. We just can't keep climbing, and that's the problem. Everybody's got to balance their budget. You have to do it, I have to do it, any business has to do it, but they don't seem to be able to do it. So how can Americans protect themselves from this potential double or tripling of tax rates?
Well, number one, they have to acknowledge that tax rates down the road are likely to be higher than they are today. They just have to acknowledge it. Maybe if you're not quite to that point, read a few of my books, read what David Walker's saying, read what Ed Slott's saying, read what former Secretary of State George Shultz said in our movie, The Power of Zero. Everybody is acknowledging that we need more revenue. Okay, so number one, acknowledge that tax rates are going to go up. Number two, acknowledge that it's okay to preemptively pay a tax before the IRS absolutely requires it of you, right? And that's the big hang up that people have about getting to the 0% tax bracket in retirement. It requires you to pay a tax today before the IRS absolutely requires it of you. So we say, look, you can either pay it now while taxes are on sale or postpone the payment until some point down the road when tax rates are likely to be much higher than they are today. So the strategies that we talk about involve you paying a tax today. And you just have to acknowledge that tax today is likely to be lower than it will down the road, and get your dollars repositioned to tax-free. Make sure you have the ideal balances in your taxable and tax deferred, and everything else should go into that tax-free bucket.
So David, let's say you got a 65-year-old couple, they got $1 million, probably most of it's in 401ks, IRAs. How can they start thinking that they even have a chance to get to that zero tax bracket?
Well, it's a great question. If they're 65 and they believe that tax rates down the road are likely to be higher than they are today, then every year matters. And the reason why every year matters is because in 2018, we got the Trump tax cuts, which reduced taxes across the board for everybody. And there's a sweet spot in that Trump tax cut. Most people that I talk to day in and day out are in the 22% tax bracket, okay? And so a lot of people say, hey, convert to the top of the 22% tax bracket. Well, guess what? The 24% tax bracket is only 2% more, but it allows you to convert an extra $174,000. And so what I tell people is convert to the top of the 22, but for an extra 2%, let's convert all the way to the top of the 24. If you got $1 million in your IRA, let's try to get you down to about $350,000 in that IRA, get everything else to tax-free, so that by the time tax rates go up in 2026, you've done all the heavy lifting and you can start taking that money out tax-free. But people also have to remember that you're going to have a standard deduction in retirement. So let's leave some money in your IRA because you got a standard deduction. You can take your RMDs out of that IRA and have that standard deduction offset those RMDs, so your RMDs are also tax-free. So we got 3 years left before tax rates go up for good. Let's just make sure that we're taking advantage of every single one of those years so that we can get the heavy lifting done before tax rates really start.
Yeah, those are great ideas. They can also do a QLAC and put like $200,000 and defer their RMDs till age 85. They can do charitable gifting out of it once they get into their 70s. So there are other strategies they can do as well, but that is great. Any other tips for young people, David? Like let's think to people in their 20s and 30s. What should they really be thinking on and really positioning themselves to be successful?
This is where I go back to Dave Ramsey. I think Dave Ramsey, for example, has got a lot of great ideas. For all the times I hammered Dave Ramsey, he's great for young people because he's telling young people not only to save 15% of their income, which they should right off the top at the beginning of the month, they spend whatever's left over, but he's also telling them to put that money in tax-free accounts like Roth 401ks and Roth IRAs. So really, it's a pretty simple formula. Right. Save money right off the top, put it in tax-free accounts, take a nap for 40 years, wake up, you'll have a great retirement.
And stop putting so much money in depreciating assets. I see young people make the huge mistake of spending so much money on cars, they take out a loan. So now they're paying interest on this depreciating asset. You're never going to get wealthy by borrowing money to put into depreciating assets, and that's one of the messages I want to get out. Now, you had some career advice too for younger people. What would be some of that? Like, you're advising your kids. Tell me what we're sharing with them.
Well, my dad once told me, I was talking to him about what I should study in college. He goes, just remember, whatever you decide to do, someone has to be willing to pay you money in exchange for that service that you can provide. So I would tell people, hey, look, before you decide to do the underwater basket weaving major or whatever, make sure that you begin with the end in mind. What service or product or can you bring to the world that they will in turn be willing to pay you for? And I think that if you let that be your guiding principle, everything will work out for you.
There's always people who are disciplined and they do the right thing, and then there are people who say, I'm going to wait, I'm going to wait. And they're the ones that typically get punished in this. So how is your system different than the mainstream financial community? Because you're solving problems a little differently than what some of these other maybe talking heads are talking about.
Well, I mean, So how are the mainstream financial gurus talking about these types of things? Well, if you look at what Americans are doing, Americans have most of their money going into 401ks and IRAs. 95% of the retirement savings are situated in those buckets, okay? Why? Because I think that they're addicted to the tax deduction. They like getting a tax deduction today because it gives them more spending power today, right? So I think that, once people acknowledge that tax rates are going to be higher, then they can start paying those taxes today, taking advantage of every nook and cranny in the IRS tax code. I'm talking about Roth IRAs, Roth 401ks, Roth conversions, using permanent life insurance as a way. You've long talked about permanent life insurance as a safe and productive way to grow your money. It's like a bond replacement. Reach into your portfolio, pull out the bonds, replace it with cash value life insurance. You'll increase your return, you'll lower your risk, lower the standard deviation of your entire portfolio, and experience a better outcome over time. So there's resources available to us. Ed Slott talks about permanent life insurance as a single greatest tax benefit in the IRS tax code. Ed Slott, somebody that the Wall Street Journal is called the America's IRA expert. So there's nooks and crannies in the IRS tax code that people don't know about, and when used in the right ways and in the right combination, can really help shield you from the impact of higher taxes.
Now, how can we make this message relevant for young people as well? I think the key is they've got time.
Right.
They've got time. That's their biggest resource.
Yeah, so they do have time. They do have time on their side. They have time value of money. They can grow and compound those savings over a long period of time. So the earlier you get started in life, the better off you're going to be. You don't really earn all of your money until those last 5 years before retirement. So if you wait 5 years, you're going to miss out on that 5 years, of compounding that you would have experienced right before you retire. So the other thing is, not only do you need to start early, but you need to invest tax-free. And here's why. I tell people that the farther out your investment horizon, the more likely your taxes are going to be higher in the future. For example, take a 20-year-old that wants to retire in 45 years. Well, what's the national debt going to be under current projections? We're talking $70 trillion. Well, guess what? How are we going to afford the interest on $70 trillion? We're going to have to raise taxes, okay? And so if you, as a young person, as a 20-year-old or 30-year-old, are investing your retirement savings into a 401k or an IRA, you're getting a deduction at today's historically low tax rates, only to postpone the payment of those taxes till 2050 or 2060. What are tax rates going to be? So I say the farther out your investment horizon, the more it makes sense for you to invest in tax-free accounts.
No, that's exactly right. So you got a new book coming out. What's that going to be all about?
Yeah, so the new book, the working title of my new book, I just sent it to my agent actually about 2 days ago. So the working title is Guru: Why Financial Gurus Are Leading You Astray and How to Get Back on Track. And I trained my sights on the likes of Susie Orman and Dave Ramsey and Ken Fisher and Clark Howard and Ramit Sethi from Netflix. There's just a lot of, when you're a guru, you have to make your message sufficiently broad and watered down so that it appeals to everybody. Everybody's got to read your books or watch your show and feel like, hey, that guy's talking to me. And so you don't really have the luxury of nuance. You have to paint everything with one broad brush. And so the type of tailored, customized message or plan that you need to be able to wring the most efficiency out of your retirement dollars, they're just not able to give it to you. And so in this book, I talk about a lot of the good things that the gurus are doing, but I talk about some of the ways that they fall short. I identify what I call a guru gap. It's where their advice stops and where you need to get to, and a lot of Americans fall into that guru gap. And so part of what I'm trying to do is help bridge that gap between where the gurus stop and where the information that people need and their plan calls for to be able to wring the most efficiency out of their retirement dollars. So that's what I'm trying to identify, in just as a way of moving the football down the field in terms of this discussion about sustainable retirement planning principles in retirement.
I hear a lot of young people say, well, I don't need life insurance. And I always like to say, of course you don't need life insurance. You can't buy any insurance when you need it. When you need car insurance is when you cause a 5-car pileup on the freeway. You try calling State Farm and say, oh, State Farm, so glad you answered the phone. I need some car insurance. They won't sell it to you. Right. You need homeowners insurance when there's a hurricane. Try calling the company. They won't sell it to you. You can't buy any insurance when you need it. You're young, you're healthy, you can afford it. This is exactly when you get some life insurance. So, David, How can our viewers find out more about you? Where can they find you? I know I can find you all over the place, but just give us some places where we can find you.
The best place to go is just to powerzero.com and check me out. You can learn all about my books. You can learn about, sustainable retirement plan principles. We've got frequently asked questions. We've got a lot of videos on there. So just go there. You can check me out. You can read any of my books that can be bought on Amazon as well.
And you're on YouTube all over the place as well.
Right.
So great. Thank you, David, for coming and sharing your wisdom with our audience today.
Thanks, Tom, for having me.